Tonight's talk is based on the writings of Saint Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain. He wrote about over 100 works and spent most of his life on the Holy Mountain. A very important father who translated, updated manuscripts of the Holy Fathers, so he's a great authority, 18th century. He talks about that when God created the world, the first thing he did, he created the invisible world. The world of angels, spirits. And then he created the visible world, which we read about in Genesis. The earth, the sky, the solar system, and the nebulae, and various solar systems which are beyond. Incredible. And then, finally, he created his masterpiece. What is that?
Humans.
Yes, man, Adam, man. So man is the pinnacle of creation. Vershina Torenia. Pinnacle. So he's at the top. We're above the angels, we're above the world that is created. And so Adam, and what is actually the miraculous thing, and why we are at the pinnacle, at the top of creation, is because inside us we contain the angelic. We have a soul and spirit. We have a physical body, so we are united to the universe, the physical world. And so we have both attributes, the invisible and the visible, inside us. And so St. Gregory the theologian says that man is actually a large world, macrocosmos, inside a microcosmos. Now we see this completely differently. We see, well, the universe is so large and we're that size, tiny, so how can we be of any significance? Also, we could die very quickly if the temperature rose a few degrees. Some of you are scientists may confirm that. And so we're very vulnerable. The line between death and life is very, very thin. The wall, I should say, is very thin. And yet, we're greater than the universe. We are a whole large world inside a small world. So the universe that we know it, the earth, is smaller than us. And it includes the angels. Their world is smaller than ours. So what went wrong? Why don't we realize this? So Nicodemus says that, let me quote from St. Gregory the theologian. God has placed this second cosmos, that's us, man, to be upon earth as a great world within a small one. The invisible world of angels is small by comparison. So the angels, their world is much smaller than ours. How many angels can dance on the tip of a needle? That was some philosophical problem that was people engaged in the Middle Ages. I never know why, I never followed it up. St. Nicodemus says we have to compare our body like a palace. Not like a barn, not like a garden shed, but like a palace. Something very beautiful and very precious. This is our body. And he uses this analogy to explain the glory that man is by the creation. God's love for us is so great that we are magnificent. Although we don't behave like that, in fact we don't even recognize how precious we are. And what a wonderful creation we are. Higher than the angels. Higher than the universe. What does the universe mean? I mean, a year ago we were in Switzerland and we were invited to a planetarium. by a person who ran it, and so we had a private viewing, and he showed us. I'd never been to one before, but it was amazing, and he showed us some pictures of nebula which are in other solar systems. They are incredible, so beautiful, but they're nothing compared to us as a creation. So the body is like a palace, and he says that the upper room of this palace is the head, and the innermost chamber is the heart, and the messengers are the thoughts. And in this palace lives a king, obviously, that's who lives in a palace. The king is our mind and our soul. It's emphasizing how precious our creation is. And it says that the soul, on a practical level, contains the whole body. The body does not contain the soul. We always think in terms of the body and then the soul, and the body contains the... No, it's the other way around. It's the soul that gives life to the body. We witnessed this recently with the repose of Ketevan, Leah. There she was, alive, and the next she isn't in his body. I mean, her body is precious because it was a temple of the Holy Spirit, very important, and so we buried her with great respect and love. But she was not there in the sense that her soul had left the body behind. Before baptism, the mind, or the soul, some of the fathers use various terms for the mind and the soul, and so they're interchangeable. So sometimes when we talk about the mind, we're actually talking about the soul, and when we talk about the soul, we're talking about the mind. And sometimes the fathers say the heart. We don't think of this in terms of physical things. This is mystical, this is a mystery. Before holy baptism, the mind is dark. It has no light. But after baptism, it becomes all light, it becomes the glory of baptism. And St. John Chrysostom says this glory remains with us only for 1 or 2 days. Now he's talking about, in particular, adult baptism. And so people were converting and baptizing, and people do here, of course, in the States. The glory of baptism lasts for 1 or 2 days. We extinguish it, and I'll quote here, "For we extinguish it, being led astray by the winter of worldly cares, the dense clouds of which block out its rays." It's not that the glory of baptism disappears, it's that we, because of our worldly cares, which affect all of us, there's no exception, then that glory dissipates, begins to disappear. Now I was thinking about this, it's like spiritual experience. This affects everybody here in this room tonight who've had the experience. We've had the experience of the Hawaii icon and the myrrh. And earlier we had the experience of Nicholas icon streaming, the Kursk icon. And when it's with us, these things are with us, we feel, I think we feel really human for the first time. And then after a few days, it's gone.
Few hours. Few hours.
Few hours, yes, you're right, yeah. And Holy Communion, Prichastia, how long does that last? Each person is different, but it's so spiritual experience, spiritual delight is what he likes to use the word, and I like that word. Spiritual delight doesn't last very long. You go on a pilgrimage, and you're moved because you're venerating the saints, you're going to various places. We did this recently, and then when you come back, it's gone. On the Holy Mountain, I venerated the relics of St. Gregory Palamas because they have the relics at Estate Menu Monastery, and I was invited to venerate the relics, and I took some cotton wool, and the priest took and he wiped the relics and gave it to me in a beautiful fragrance, Blagoduchania, beautiful, and I put it in my bag that I was carrying, to take back to England, and within 3 days before I got back, it'd gone. Though I was told actually that it hadn't gone, I just couldn't smell it. All right, there's a difference. So it hadn't gone. Does that give you a clue? That if something disappears as the spiritual experience, who's to blame? Is it the Holy Spirit? I don't think so. Anyway, we mustn't be despondent about this, because this is, a part of our spiritual struggle. St. Gregory of Nyssa says that there is 2 types of pleasure. The first is physical. So we have pleasure in physical things, whatever that may be, or things that interest us and give us pleasure. And then there's pleasure in spiritual things. It is in that order. That's very important to understand. I'm going to take you right back to childhood. Actually, right before that, the procreation of children. A child is conceived with physical pleasure, that's a part of it, and then the child begins to grow in the womb. But because it has not formed yet, it does not have a rational mind. And the only pleasure that it experiences is physical. In other words, growing inside the womb and being nourished. And as you know, when the child is born, then the child has physical needs. Its soul, its mind, has not developed yet. So its first impression of the world is pleasure. But it's physical pleasure. Now, no wonder physical pleasure is so first in the line, as it were, before spiritual, because that's how we were born. Why? Because Adam was disobedient. And so we carry on his disobedience. We're not guilty of the sin, but that sin is in us, and this is why we grow up with pleasure. So when it comes to spiritual pleasure, it is very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's not easy. And I think this is one of the reasons why we lose that moment, precious moment. Sometimes we get a glimpse of it actually in the arts, of course, but this is from a different perspective, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So a lot of these are the fathers. St. Nicodemus is always quoting fathers, so this is wonderful source. St. John of Damascus, he says that there is a difference between the irrational soul and the rational soul. Remember St. Anthony saying that the intelligent soul and the unintelligent soul. If you have an intelligent soul, you have a love for God, and that's all you want to do is live for God. That is the main thing in your life. If you have an unintelligent soul, you live for pleasure, for money, for work, ambition. And certainly the emphasis is on physical pleasure. And St. Anthony says that, actually St. John of Damascus and St. Anthony, they both say that the body becomes, the soul is ruled by the body and senses. It's led by the senses. And it's ruled by them. How true this is. We are led and ruled by our passions, our desire for physical pleasure. This is because of the fall, because of the sin of Adam. And so it's not surprising that we were attracted to fine foods or whatever. Even beauty can be misunderstood. It's based on physical pleasure as opposed to spiritual. But St. Anthony says that the visible things around the world, and this is now the positive side, is that they are prototypes of invisible things. And for example, when we look at something which is beautiful, we should be seeing the beauty that created it. And I come back to this amazing presentation in the planetarium of these nebulae. Amazing, is that when we see these things, they should remind us that there's somebody behind there who is far more beautiful and extraordinary, who is God, the Creator. And anything we look at that is beautiful, we should be looking at, that should lead us towards the Creator. But unfortunately, it seems to stop there. And so we love beauty for its own sake, not because it should be leading us to something spiritual. That's the whole idea of art and music, is leading us to something spiritual. In other words, the Creator, to God. But we suddenly stop and think that this is where it is. And I think this is why a lot of people are frustrated in the art world, is because they can't create the perfect thing, because they don't understand that what they're doing is leading towards the Creator. I don't really understand that, and I don't think I'm certainly not an expert in that area, but I'm beginning to see that we need to contemplate beauty. It's very important. Whether that is, a sunset, something in nature, the sky. Look at the sky sometimes, the stars, and it's beautiful, and the new moon. And people. People are beautiful. Look at them. And by looking at them, we see the Creator, this wonderful God, our wonderful God who has created us and placed us at the pinnacle of creation. St. John of Damascus says, the ordinary mind is worldly and unstable because it produces good and bad thoughts. It's changeable. An unrestrained life. Saying the people who live an unrestrained life, a bad life, they are very, their desire is that others should be the same, so that they have an excuse. I'm not the only one. And and he's saying that you should avoid such people. In fact, they are not much higher than the animals themselves, because they're driven by desire. Well, we know that with animals, that they can't always make decisions. Some animals, there is intelligence in animals, no doubt about that, but they are driven by drives. And so they have to react to whatever. If you put food down, they're going to eat it. They are led by nature. And if we don't realize our full potential, our spiritual nature, then we too are led by nature. And this is why we have problems. This is why we have problems with addiction, alcoholism. We cannot there's no control, there's no rational thinking. Led by nature instead of leading it. But if we look at nature in a positive sense, then we can see the beauty of creation.